In this module, I want to talk about the basics and understanding the Microsoft Office integration capabilities within a Cisco on-premise presence solution using Cisco Jabber for Windows. Now, I want you to understand that when I say Microsoft Office, in most cases, what I actually mean and what Cisco actually means is Microsoft Outlook. So there are a few different integrations using the Microsoft API for presence that we can tap into. Most often, this is for Outlook. I know there are some capabilities for SharePoint as well. I'm not going to get into those in this module, but let's jump into this and talk about a primer of how this works and what the capabilities are and what you can expect doing the Microsoft Office integration with Jabber. First off, let's talk about the basics of a Microsoft Office integration with Cisco on-premise presence using Jabber for Windows. Now, first off, when I talk about the integration, and I mentioned this a second ago, I'm primarily referring to integrations with the Microsoft Outlook product to give us presence indicators that can be displayed that are in sync with the Jabber presence status. One thing you need to be aware of when performing a Microsoft Office integration with Jabber for Windows is that only one presence solution can exist at a time. Now, one of the things that's pretty common as people begin to migrate away from Microsoft Link deployments and toward Cisco Jabber deployments, there's often a period of coexistence where both client applications want to exist on the same desktop. Now, one issue with that is there is a Windows API for this Office integration, and only one presence solution can access it at a single time. So if you had Microsoft Link installed on your desktop and you go ahead and you install Cisco Jabber for Windows, the presence jelly beans inside of the Outlook application that previously were triggered by Link are now going to be triggered by Jabber. So you have to keep that in mind when the products are coexisting. It will break things. Now, what's it look like? So here are a couple of screenshots from my Microsoft Outlook client here in the lab. On the left-hand side here, you'll see that I was composing an email, and I typed in the name of the recipient, and you can see a couple of different things. First off, to the left of the name, you see my presence indicator, the green. If you look at my mouse cursor hovering, which is what I'm doing in this screenshot, hovering over the user ID, you'll see a miniature version of my contact card appear, and it'll show you various options that are available to interact with me using this integration. So you've got send an email, start a chat, make a phone call, etc. And that all appears alongside with my presence integration. Now, if you were doing a full-blown presence deployment, you would likely actually have pictures in your Active Directory, and then the photo would show up as well. I don't have that integration going on here in this environment, and I'm not going to cover that as part of this course. So we're going to just leave the default silhouette illustration showing there. On the right-hand side, I've actually opened my full contact card, and I've only got very minimal data in my contact, so you're not seeing too much in the way of phone numbers, etc. But again, you see that status of available. You can have those same buttons as you did in the miniature view of my contact card for send an email, chat, make a phone call, etc. So it's pretty simple. In fact, I don't even have a Microsoft Exchange environment. So people always think of this, or I hear people talk about this as though it is a presence integration with Exchange. That's not what this is at all. This is a presence integration with Microsoft Outlook, the client. In order to set this up, there is an Active Directory LDAP attribute that you need to configure, and it's called the proxy address. The default value that you're going to find in the proxy address field on the user account in Active Directory under the LDAP attributes is going to be SMTP : and your contact address. So mine is josh@cisco.lab. You will need to create an additional value under proxy address, and it is going to be SIP : Jabber ID. So in this example, we're using the SAM account name, which is Josh, at presence domain, so at cisco.lab. So we talked about Jabber IDs before, so this is just my Jabber ID. If this value is not configured, the Microsoft Office integration will not function properly. So be sure that you remember to configure this LDAP attribute of proxy address for all of the users that you want to have the Microsoft Office integration. Now, one tip that I'll give you is don't fret over trying to do this manually. Talk to your Active Directory support staff, and they'll likely have some tricks up their sleeves that they can use to deploy this in bulk. Now, how do we go about setting the proxy address LDAP attribute? So again, I mentioned have your AD staff do this in bulk, but how do we do it the first time? How do we kick the tires on it? Now, there's a couple of ways to do it, and it really depends on which version of Windows you're using. So let's start with the newer stuff, and then we'll go back to the old stuff. So if you're using Windows 2008 or newer, you're going to be able to access the attribute editor as part of the Active Directory users and computers Microsoft Management Console snap-in. Now, in my lab, I'm running a Windows 2003 domain, so I have to use a tool called ADSI Edit. And I'm going to show you that tool here in just a moment so you can get an idea of what that process looks like. It's really fairly straightforward, but again, setting this proxy address attribute in LDAP is critical to successful operation of the Microsoft Office or Microsoft Outlook integration. Now, if you're on a Windows Server 2008 domain or newer, you can simply go into the user properties of Active Directory users and computers and go into the attribute editor and edit the proxy address attribute. Now, unfortunately, I'm not on a 2008 domain. I'm still in a 2003 domain, which many of you may be in the same boat. So what you'll have to do is install the Windows 2003 support tools, and with that, you'll get the ADSI Edit application. I've opened that application and connected to my domain, and if I browse into users and then find my own user account, I can go ahead and hit Properties, and I'll be able to use the attribute editor here. What's important that you do is for that proxy address attribute, and there we have it, that you go ahead and you put in the SIP:/Jabber ID. So mine, in this case, is josh@cisco.lab. So that will work, and we'll hit OK, and we can close out of ADSI Edit, and we'll be good to go. In this module, we covered the fundamentals of integrating Microsoft Office or Microsoft Outlook with Cisco Jabber for Windows as part of an on-premise presence solution. We talked about the mandatory LDAP attribute of proxy address that you'll need to configure. We gave you some configuration tips for the LDAP environment and how to go about populating those records. And we talked about and did a demonstration of utilizing the ADSI Edit tool if you happen to be on a Windows 2003 domain. So this is a pretty good primer of what to expect for Microsoft Office or Microsoft Outlook integration with Jabber for Windows and what presence capabilities and features you can come to expect to function in your environment. In the next module, we're going to begin configuration and go through the basic installation process of a Cisco IM and Presence server, and then once the installation is complete, we'll launch the web GUI and perform a basic integration with Cisco Unified Communications Manager and talk about how to configure some of the basic parameters necessary for the integration to function. So you're well on your way at getting an operational on-premise presence solution based on Jabber for Windows and the Cisco IM and Presence server with Unified Communications Manager. That's enough rambling for this video. Hopefully this has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next module.